got another one. Got a spare one.
I think I might need to move that because that is broken.
Seats broken.
Move too much. I'm going to go to Thomas first, then I'm going to Kat, then I'm going to Nina, and then I'm going to Judith. It doesn't matter the order of sitting, wherever you feel comfortable.
You're not sharing the mic. Looks like you're right. You've learned that everything
Wired microphones. Look at the pros. Let's turn both phones off. And are we being streamed to the interweb? Are we being streamed to the interweb as well?
Great.
Okay, thanks everyone. Thank you very much for coming to our Nature Tech session here today. So I'm Lucy Armand. I'm the chair of the Nature for Climate Coalition, who are the co-hosts of the wonderful Nature Zone you're sitting in with our many partners. So we're delighted to host our panel of experts here on Nature Tech. Basically for the last week, I've been here since last Saturday, and I've been kind of running up and down the corridors of COP. And if you knew about my sense of direction, you'd understand I'm basically permanently lost at COP, permanently lost. So that meant I've been bumping into a lot of people. And every time I bump into someone, I say, you come into our Nature Tech session, you've got to come to our Nature Tech session. And they're like, wow, that's cool. Yeah, definitely coming. What is it? So we're here today to hopefully try and shed a little bit of light onto what Nature Tech is and why it's important. Before we get into our panel session, I'll just give you a couple of minutes of context on the background of how we've got here. So Nature for Climate has been working really to promote, our mission is to promote high integrity nature-based solutions. So investment in and action on nature-based solutions. And so we see tech as an enabler to help us get to that world of high ambition, high integrity, nature-based solutions. And so we've been launching a Nature Tech narrative work stream, working with many of the Nature Tech entrepreneurs in the room to get that story out and about Nature Tech, whether it's covering deployment, transparency, accountability, monitoring, but to get people to understand the role that tech can play to enable high integrity nature-based solutions. So before we get going, I'm just going to play a short film that will explain a little bit about what Nature Tech is through the words and the voices of some of our Nature Tech entrepreneurs.
Nature Tech is helping to assess data across carbon, biodiversity and communities to de-risk companies' nature investments and allow them to find high-integrity projects and interventions that align with their values.
Nature Tech is enabling us to bring transparency to restoration projects of all shapes and sizes, accelerating learning, collaboration, and impact.
Nature Tech is what will make global reforestation possible this decade. With it, we can restore land at massive scale and with high efficiency, improving everything from seed collection and banking, training new forestry teams, and ultimately improving tree survival in the field.
Nature Tech is applying state-of-the-art technology to track and measure with incredible precision how carbon projects are being managed around the world, so that we can finally know their true impact when it comes to both emissions reductions and their influence on local communities and biodiversity.
Nature Tech is accelerating environmental responsibility, making global supply chains traceable, inclusive and climate smart. It also empowers and connects producers and businesses across continents.
Nature Tech is empowering the farmers and ranchers who manage the majority of the habitable land here on Earth to be appropriately compensated for the value they create for society.
Nature Tech helps us to design and scope very large-scale, high-impact landscape regeneration projects, and to collaborate in a transparent and holistic way with multiple groups of stakeholders so that we can rapidly deliver these programs in a way that is serving nature, climate, and people.
Nature Tech, in its broadest sense, is the infrastructure that allows trade to be executed on a marketplace or an exchange with absolute trust. But it's also Nature Tech that allows the price discovery and the premiums that high-quality nature-based solutions should demand.
Nature Tech enables us to create habitat baselines for nature-based solution projects worldwide, and allows us to monitor the progress of reforestation and forest protection projects in terms of carbon sequestration, ensuring climate and biodiversity benefits are met.
Great. A big thank you to all the organisations that helped put that film together. We're hoping to add to that after COP27 with more exciting announcements and companies from Nature Tech. Before we get into the panel, I also just want to say that today we're really excited to launch a new Nature Tech report. So we have worked with our partners, Capital for Climate, who sadly can't be with us here today in the room, but we commissioned a report to do an analysis of the whole Nature Tech market. And so today, the current size of the Nature Tech market is estimated to be around $2 billion, compared to, say, a climate tech market of $19 billion. But in the report, they look at how the exponential growth that's likely to happen in the next 10 years and how it may grow to $6 billion or more, given that this is an emerging space. So if you go to the Nature for Climate website, you can download a copy of that report. In the interviews they did with the companies, the CEO or co-founder of Cultivo, a natural capital company, he made the point that capital moves to nature at the speed of trust. And that's why we're here today. So our plan today is to talk to our panel of experts to look at what needs to happen from a finance perspective, a civil society perspective, a private sector perspective, and also from a tech entrepreneur to help increase trust and investment in this emerging sector. So I'm going to hand over to my moderator here, Mark Gough, the CEO of the Capitals Coalition, to take you into the panel.
Thank you, and welcome to the best session you're going to come to throughout the whole of COP. So this is really the sexy bit, isn't it? Because actually, I've been wandering the halls getting lost, the same as Lucy. And when I mentioned this session, and thank you, Robert, for coming. Robert's one of the people I bumped into and said you must come to it. He turned up, so that's good. So this is the bit where we start getting the exciting stuff coming into the conversation. Now, there's one technology that's been in development now for about 4.5 billion years, and that's nature. Nature does quite a good job of doing this. But as we've been finding out, what we're doing with Nature Tech is accelerating that. We're making it transparent. We're connecting it up. We're using that innovation from technology to take nature into being the solution that it needs to be. So that's really what we're doing here. We're using that, but we're connecting it back down to nature, which is why I'm really pleased, particularly when we come to safeguarding in a minute, we've got to do this in the right way. So first of all, we've got Thomas Lingard, who's the global head of sustainability at Unilever. I'm sure you've heard of that company at some point. We've got Kat Bruce here, who I'm sure a lot of you will know as well, who is the CEO at Nature Metrics. We've got Nina from CISL, who's our finance expert. And then we've got Judith, who's going to bring in some of the safeguarding. So I'm going to come to you first, Thomas. Where's the need coming from this from a private sector perspective? Why do you need nature tech?
Well, thank you, and thanks very much for having us here today. I think, like a lot of companies, we started out probably with some high-level climate targets a decade or so ago, and we've been building up the infrastructure to measure progress against those in our operations and value chain. And now the same thing is happening with nature. So I think we're going in the same direction with a little bit of delay, but I can see this being an even bigger agenda actually because of the complexity of the data you need to check that you're on track. And obviously, if companies are setting targets, they're making commitments, stakeholders are increasingly wanting to see proof that you're making progress against those. It's not enough just to, I think, increasingly have sort of anecdotal reports of having done some projects or spent some money. They want to see, well, what's changing on the ground in the places from which you're sourcing. Obviously, because the sort of the pressures the ecosystems are under, you don't want to sort of wait some 3-5 year lag for an impact report to come back and tell you that the ecosystem you thought you were protecting actually wasn't protected and has actually been further degraded. You want to know in real time, and that's where the technology really has the edge on sort of historical legacy ways of understanding what impacts work is having.
So if accountability is a word I'm hearing you saying there about making sure the investments, the work you're doing is really delivering. Who does that mean within the corporate, within your business, is taking note of this? Because it sounds to me like your head of risk, people like that, your finance controller, they're going to be the ones that are going to want to know this as much as you are. Is that right?
Well, we've made a number of internal changes actually in how we manage the governance and the performance reporting. So my colleague Lizanne, actually, who was our former group chief auditor and group financial controller after that, is now our head of sustainable business performance and reporting. So all of the metrics, all of the commitments that have sort of numerical data under them are now sort of the delivery and the auditing and the management of those is sort of under her control. And so we're bringing the kind of rigor that we've used for 100 years on our financial systems now to the climate and nature reporting as well.
Excellent. Kat, maybe I can come to you next. So you've been around, you were one of the first to see this sort of ideas, about 7 years developing this. How has the space developed? How has it changed? And particularly then also about the finance. How you went out for venture capital, you developed a model and a tool out of this. So how's it changed and how have you gone about getting the money?
Thanks. Yeah. Ooh, that's very loud. Hi everyone. I'm Kat Bruce from Nature Metrics. We work primarily with a tool called environmental DNA for doing very large-scale, rapid measurement of biodiversity. It's based on the fact that organisms are going around the environment leaving traces of DNA, which end up, a lot of them, in the water. Our technology actually starts off very low-tech with just a very simple filter. You can push water through, you capture the DNA traces in here. This goes back to our molecular laboratories, and then we turn that into ecological data, and we have a team of data scientists who turn the data into insights. When I first went out to look for investment for this company back in 2015, the main thing that I was asked by investors, who I was only asking for a tiny bit of money just to get our first lab set up, but they were like, really? I mean, who's going to pay to know about nature and biodiversity? I mean, is it really important enough to anyone with money? And luckily, there was a big regulated market for biodiversity monitoring. So we were able to say, look, we let these guys do what they need to do faster, cheaper, better. And so that, that's good enough to get started. Within the intervening time, nobody asks us that question anymore. As soon as you say to investors, we work in data for nature, they're like, oh yeah, well obviously that's huge. So it's been amazing to see that sort of change. So I guess we took a particular path in deciding to go down the sort of equity investment, venture capital route, because we wanted to build this fast to get it out there and to be able to deliver it at scale. There's sort of pros and cons with going with different models of scaling and growth. And for us, having the venture capital backing has been great. We've had to take them through a process of sort of saying, look, we're getting to a big scalable data business model to do with data, which is where they all want to get to. That's what they're all excited about. But first, we have to build the market. We need to sort of mainstream this technology, et cetera, et cetera. And we've ended up in a place that we just did an equity round in May. We raised £12 million, which was from 4 impact VCs who are starting to include nature within their the sort of focal areas as well as climate and other things. So we've got a bank, BNP Paribas. We've got an oceans-focused investor, we've got a climate-focused investor, and a digital tech positive impact one. So they all want us to report on the positive impact that we're delivering alongside the financials, but they do still want us to provide money in the end.
Yeah, you still need the money. Excellent. So talking about we need the money, let's come to Nina then. So are financial institutions interested in this? We've just heard that Cat's been able to get some venture capital, but how is this going to change the financial markets, having this sort of information?
Yeah, and I think in that case, there are two different types of finance that we're talking about here, right? It's how do we get finance to people like Cat to grow that business, but also how does nature tech allow finance to flow into the communities? And if you think about that latter part, again, there are different ways to do it. So we did a project which was called Project Trado, where we looked at Malawian tea farming practices, and then we used effectively blockchain to track the sustainability of those practices, so that you can take a tea bag out of Sainsbury's, out of a supermarket, and you know exactly what the sustainability practices of particular tea farmers that farmed that tea were. But what was really interesting is then you incentivized farmers on the ground with invoice financing, so with quicker payments. So effectively, you then use technology to actually drive payments into the quick payments into the local community. I think that's one way. The second way is we have a huge issue currently within the financial system where we know we've got nature-related financial risks sitting within the system. We don't really understand them, we don't really measure them, we don't really manage them. And in order to measure and manage them, we do need a lot more of nature tech work so that we can say, actually, we know that land degradation drives financial risk because we've done a piece of work with Robeco on it. But can we scale that piece instead of going into one scenario, knowing exactly where is it sitting and how do we trace it through those financial portfolios?
And are you seeing that scaling happening already? I mean, how quickly is it going from your perspective?
No, so it was really interesting because I was having a conversation with a private equity investor literally yesterday. He was saying that they're currently investing in nature, not necessarily nature techs, but in nature-based solutions, not on the expectations that they will pay out within the next 3 to 6 months, but on the expectations that within the next 2 to 3 years, investors are going to flock into them quite seriously. And at that point, they will already have an investable proposition. So actually, I think we're seeing the market move. We're seeing the nature market in terms of the financials. Let's talk about financials. So we're seeing nature starting to penetrate slightly quicker, I think, than climate did.
Excellent. So it's sounding like we've got all the boxes ticked, doesn't it? So we've got the need from Thomas. We've got the innovation and things coming through from Kat. We've got the finance flowing. Is there anything we need to, is there a safeguards we need on this, Judith, do you think?
Thanks for the question. Yes, so I think safeguards in nature tech is very important. Nature tech has the potential to generate certain risks and impacts for people in nature, but on the flip side, it also has the potential. Oh, thank you. On the flip side, it also has the potential to generate enormous benefits. These are two sides of the same coin. The potential risks that can be generated, but also if you do things well, inclusively, with participation, with a focus on biodiversity, etc., you can generate really positive impacts. For example, nature tech could present conflicts or issues if it's not done in a consultative way, if it doesn't empower local communities or doesn't involve participation. On the other hand, if it's designed in a way to ensure that there is participation from indigenous peoples, local communities, it can lead to improved governance, improved participation. I think in terms of safeguards for nature tech, it's important to look at three different aspects, three different categories. The first is the tech itself. How is it manufactured? Is it done in a sustainable way? Is it causing displacement of local communities in order to extract different natural resources and minerals? Is it creating pollution? And also the design of nature tech. Is it inclusive? For example, new technology, is it considering different aspects for gender, such as the female form for safety equipment. And also in terms of design, is it inclusive and accessible for Indigenous peoples and local communities? One really nice example of where it is an app called Cyber Tracker, which is for biodiversity monitoring, and it uses icons, which can really enable and facilitate the use by Indigenous peoples and local communities who may speak a range of different native languages. Another aspect that's really important to consider is the use of the tech itself. If it's being implemented in an area that includes Indigenous peoples, is free, prior, and informed consent being carried out? Is it being designed in a way that's inclusive, equitable, accessible to the different populations that are using it or could potentially be affected by it? There's also an issue related to the use of the data that's generated by the tech. One really striking example is related to environmental defenders and privacy. If data or information on the location of environmental defenders gets into the wrong hands, it could be a risk to their very lives. Over 1,700 environmental defenders have been murdered over the past decade. Therefore, issues related to privacy and the use of data are incredibly important for tech. So there's a whole range of safeguards issues which are really relevant. So definitely, yeah.
And one of the things in the report, and I really would recommend all of you to go and read the report, it talks about a lot of this technology as well coming from the Global South. That Global South is really playing a big role in this. Kat, in your experience with the work that you're doing, how do you see that coming out? I mean, is it that there are certain countries, certain people that are where this is happening more?
I don't know if I can comment on the whole nature tech sector in the Global South.
No, but from your experience, maybe.
Yeah, so in our experience, our big challenge actually in taking our technology and embedding it more in the countries where we work is in the capacity that there is for laboratories and the education that's needed to be able to staff them. So we're working with universities in a few places to start building up the sort of general molecular capabilities so that there are people who could staff labs at one point or another. But yeah, I mean, I think there's a huge amount of entrepreneurialism coming. I've spent quite a bit of time in Kenya and South Africa recently. There's huge amounts going on there, and actually just finding ways to bring funding, to bring finance and backing to those companies, to encourage entrepreneurs to build their own solutions for the problems that they're seeing and interacting with and living with day to day. That's how you're going to get the fastest development of the sort of tech that's really going to have the big impacts.
Yeah, maybe we can go to Thomas now. An example. Give us an example about how this is working, and maybe for me, particularly from a corporate sector, because I spent long time working in the corporate sector, it's always a lot about partnerships and about who you're working with. So how's that coming through for you?
I'm going to answer that question, but I just want to say how lucky we are to have Judith here on this panel today, because often the tech conversations are in a very, tech is always good, tech is the solution. And I do think, we think we've got lots of applications for tech that we're using in our own business, but we're often missing this voice about the things we need in place to ensure it's done in the right way. So I'm really grateful that Judith's here. So look, we've got a zero deforestation commitment for our principal tropical commodities by 2023, and one of the ways we've been using tech to try and monitor that has been a whole ecosystem of different solution providers coming together on a kind of Google Cloud platform where we used to integrate. So if I'm going to read some of this out because I'm not deep involved in all the details and I want to get the names right. But we're using a Maplecroft system to determine where the high impact ecosystems are. We're trying to work out exactly what the right metrics are for our supply chain systems, but we're looking at a species threat abatement and restoration metric, STAR, and an integrated biodiversity assessment tool, IBAT. And we're using that to try and work out exactly what we plug in to our own sustainable sourcing systems. We're working with a company called Descartes Labs. They create the sort of geospatial data layers that we can use for the mapping. You may all be more familiar with these companies than I am, but That allows us to pick up in real time when something changes. It used to be you might get a report after something terrible had happened, and then you can go and intervene. And now we find out in much more real time. Literally, the phone rings in the office, and we can go and find out what's happened, which tree's gone down where, ring up the supplier and say, it looks like there's been a breach of a code in this area. Can you investigate and remediate if necessary? Very interesting technology with a company called Orbital Insights, which is using anonymized GPS tracking effectively of mobile phone signals to identify traffic routes on roads, and you can use that to to look at vehicle movements between, say, palm oil plantations and mills. So if you start to see a lot of traffic from an area that you know shouldn't be being sourced from, and a mill that Unilever is sourcing from, then again that can trigger an early warning system that maybe people are developing where they shouldn't be developing, and allow us to take action. We've got a system called Premise, which is a kind of ground truth system which allows people to put in sort of photographs and comments from on the ground about what's happening, so that they can match that up with what we're seeing from the air. And then we're using in our main sort of SAP systems SAP Green Token as a kind of blockchain solution that allows us to track commodities through the value chain. So it's not one technology, it's lots of technologies that the Sustainable Sourcing team are bringing together to help us make sure that we're delivering on that commitment we've made on our tropical commodities.
One of the ones I loved was the ocean tracking as well, where they're tracking the boats, and if they're meeting in the sea with another ship, you know that they're offloading things, etc. But then the really clever bit was then going to the insurance company of the ship. It wasn't trying to take the company that owned the ship, but going to the insurance company, because the insurance company have statements saying they won't do something. So it's about those partnerships again, isn't it? So this tech is really going to work if we can get the partnerships. Maybe you can just pass back to, again, but what about involving local communities? I mean, we know that local communities are involved in a lot of this approach. I was talking to Tom earlier on about in Peru, where they're doing the testing, and the local communities are the ones that are going out and stopping the logging because they've got the information now. And there's studies that are proving that this is really working. This is really stopping things. How do we engage communities more?
Definitely. Yeah, I think that's a really key question, how to engage in local communities, and I think the whole point is that they're involved from the ground up in different initiatives. They're not just beneficiaries, but rather they're guiding and helping to form how the tech is designed, how it's used, how it's accessed, and that they have access to the data and information. I've seen many cases where communities have a very key role in generating data and information, but then at the end the data is not shared with them. From UNEP WCMC, we're working on a new initiative called Spaces. It's a coalition focused on the use of spatial intelligence to inform decisions on nature and climate. We've recently published a paper called Tech to Track, which is available at spacescoalition.org, and we have a number of examples of how local communities, indigenous peoples, different kinds of tech can be used in equitable and inclusive ways, not just in this paper, but in other pieces of work that are being developed through this. But it's an absolutely key and essential issue when talking about nature for tech.
Excellent. Nina, can I just come to you? Sorry, you can use this mic. Yeah, keep that one there. What's the role of... one of the things we're finding with the finance sector, who seem to really be stepping into a lot of things now, where a few years ago maybe they weren't, is that every single financial institution seems to be coming out with its own approach to it. So I keep on being approached by a new financial institution. Oh, we've just found this thing called natural capital. It's great. I'm going to come up with some asset classes. And sitting there and saying, well, actually, they were done about 10 years ago. So what is the role of standards or standardization in being able to make this work?
Yeah, it's actually quite funny, because if you think about where we were with climate in about 2015, 2016, where huge areas of climate science were just completely not penetrating into the financial system. I think right now we have huge areas of amazing work on the ecosystem side, on nature side, on natural capital side, and they're starting to come through. But I agree with you, there's a lot of kind of developments that are happening. I think the financial system is getting really enthusiastic about it, and when they get really excited, they get to build new products and new things and not necessarily look at what already is out there. Look, I think there are developments. Task Force for Nature-related Financial Disclosures is looking at the types of metrics that already exist that can be used. So there is or kind of there is stuff happening. There is some stuff happening on the standard side to bring it all in together. The thing that slightly worries me, actually, if I go on that side, is that we seem to be currently developing climate and nature in parallel tracks, and we're not really very good at integrating the two together. So we're ignoring some of the synergies, we're ignoring some of the trade-offs, and actually, if we can get a better grip on thinking through the climate and nature issues, thinking through the climate and biodiversity issues as we're developing technologies, nature tech, but also as we're thinking through corporate engagement on the financing side. I think that would be absolutely amazing. And actually, given that you're going to be going to COP15 and many of us will be going to COP15, it's even more key that we connect the conversation that's taking place here at COP27 with what will happen at COP15.
I was talking to Harvey Locke, who is one of the negotiators for the Canadian government, and he said 10 years ago he was talking about there should be a nature pavilion in the climate COP. Well, it's here now. We're now taking, I think we had 700 people apply to come with us to Montreal from business. There will be more businesses and NGOs in Montreal than there will be negotiators. Now, what does that say? That says we really want this, we really want it now. So, Kat, this is a bit of a cheeky question, but my father texted me earlier on and said I was doing a good job because he must have heard something. But you also knew you were on this, and he was saying, so what's the most interesting thing that you found from doing the DNA? You know, what is it that you found that was somewhere that you didn't expect to be there? Maybe you can just use that microphone.
We have a lot. This happens a lot because the technology is so much more powerful than any tools that people have had so far. So quite often our clients come back to us and go, there's a mistake here, you've got something wrong. This species, we know it's not there. It hasn't been seen for 30 years. And we look at it and we're like, nah, we're pretty confident in this detection. Like, we suggest you go to the place where the sample was taken and have a proper look, and they come back with their tail between their legs and say, oh yeah, we went and we did find it after all. So even in the UK, there's been species which have been sort of thought to be locally extinct. There was unfortunately, I can't talk about that species. A lot of our best examples I can't talk about at the moment. But we found pink river dolphins in rivers that they didn't know that they were in Peru. We found Irrawaddy dolphins just recently. We found a spectacled bear down in the Amazon. Which was definitely not supposed to be there. And that was a really interesting one because actually, really high confidence that the spectacled bear DNA was in the water. So then you start thinking, well, how has that got there? Is somebody eating spectacled bear? Is there an illegal pet? Is there, so there's potentially enforcement issues that come up with this as well. But again, that feeds in a lot with the safeguarding and the use of information. And you have issues that also around poaching and particularly sensitive species, sort of making that information available with georeferences. Like, you need to be really, really careful about that. So these are the sorts of things that we're thinking through a lot at the moment about how we use our data, how we make it available. There's a big piece around data accessibility, openness, etc., interoperability, which the whole sector needs to come together on to figure out. And just to sort of build on that a little bit as well, there's an evolution that needs to happen within the nature space now that it's becoming more high profile, more commercialized, more important to sort of bigger players. There's a legacy in our sector that solutions have been funded by philanthropy, they've been developed by NGOs, they're free and open for everybody. But that doesn't always lead to tools that are kept up to date and that are enterprise level and that are designed with the users in mind. And if we want that, we do need to make space in this world for technology businesses who will be, commercial, they need to have some sort of scalable business model to be able to attract that sort of investment. So we need to find the balance when we're playing in this world where open data is important, particularly for some sectors. It's important that information is freely available to those who need it, but at the same time, when information is being used by banks, by large corporates, etc., they would expect to pay for good quality data, and they should pay for it to make sure that it can be maintained. But I think that's a really interesting sort of space that there's a lot of work going on at the moment to try and figure out how we sort of walk that line.
And if I can comment on two things there. So one is really interesting because one of the things that, for example, financial institutions are really struggling to understand the impact of invasive species, right? And you can track that kind of stuff, and then you can have a look at actually what kind of risks we've got from invasive species. And on the data point, it's absolutely key because, again, financial firms take their data from very set databases. And yes, they're absolutely happy to pay for it. But if we have amazing sources of data, but they're completely distributed all over the place, they're not being updated, then you can't have this completely recurring process that financial institutions need to track that stuff. So absolutely.
Excellent. So we're going to round this up a little bit now. So I'm just going to come along at the usual thing we do at these events. So one question for you all. So what is it you're most excited about in this space or most concerned about? Okay, so Thomas first.
Well, look, I'm most excited about the potential for technology to be a game changer for companies, you know, even without the sort of big resources that a Unilever might have to engage and track in real time, you know, the impacts on nature that they're having. And I'm most concerned about the potential unintended negative social consequences, the privacy issues, the things we can't even quite imagine yet about how the data might be used against the very people and ecosystems we're trying to help.
So I did notice when Judith was talking, you were nodding all the way through that, and it was the first thing you wanted to come back on. I mean, some people in the audience may think, well, you know, a corporate person, really interested in that. Why is that so personal to you? Why is that so important?
It's a little bit off topic, but I've got very interested in the the dominance of the tech positive narratives and the lack of challenge to those. I started a master's in AI ethics last year that I'm working on part-time. And it's been really eye-opening in terms of some things that are not being talked about. But yeah, I'm happy to talk after the event with some good book reviews if you're interested in that area.
Excellent. So a personal level as well. What about you, Judith? What are you looking forward to, and what are you most scared about?
I think nature tech has huge potential to be a game changer, especially for Indigenous peoples, local communities, those on the front lines battling climate change, nature crises, biodiversity. But I think the data needs to be shared, generated, used in a very equitable fashion. And I think there are issues related to over harvesting of certain species, and there are apps such as iNaturalist, which sort of generalizes the location of information. I think it means there's trade-off involved. You might not have as exact information about biodiversity, but it may cause further protections for the species themselves. So I think just being aware that everything comes with certain trade-offs. For example, the use of drones in restoration is fascinating. It's a super technology, but does it mean that jobs and livelihoods are being taken away from local communities who would be, on the planting, those seedlings? So I think just to be aware of these trade-offs involved, when engaging with nature tech.
And one of the challenges that often with this space, particularly from corporates, is that it starts getting into greenwashing. They're going to start investing in nature-based solutions when they haven't dealt with the decarbonisation first. We've got to deal with that first. We can't just go straight into looking at nature-based solutions. So there, a good nod from you on that. Kat, sorry. So Kat, what about you? Surely your business, you're going out for another Series C now, are you on, or what is it?
Oh, it's so tiring. Every time we do it, we're like, hopefully we won't have to raise more funding for a while. Actually, it's a really interesting point. Right now, the venture capital market is very, very different to how it was last year. So there were a lot of business, actually, you saw this particularly in the climate tech industry, a lot of businesses raising huge amounts of money on massive valuations, even pre-revenue. And that's not happening anymore, like last year to this year with the current economic crisis. So the message from VCs to all of their portfolios at the moment is make your money last longer. Don't expect to be able to raise again at those sort of uplifted valuations for a while. So we're probably going to stretch our money out and make it last as long as possible and try to bring in as much as possible from commercial revenues. In terms of what I'm most excited about, actually I'm excited, it's about the data building, the trust and the communication to enable the finance to flow. I think we're having to bring together to make this happen, we're having to bring together like banks and ecologists, right? They don't share anything of the same language, but data is something that they can coalesce around. And in fact, not just the banks and ecologists, but all stakeholders. And if we're building data and information from the ground up, which is useful and relevant to the people on the ground, as well as being useful for guiding the higher level metrics, then we can really build that sort of trust and collaboration.
Excellent. And Nina, what about you? What are you looking forward to?
So I think one reflection, I mean, we're talking about the size of the market, and we're talking about the market going from 2 odd billion to about 6 billion. I think it's going to grow a lot bigger than that. I mean, it was one of the things when I was reading, I was like, no, that's not exponential growth. Exponential growth is much, much, much bigger than that. My slight worry with that, however, is that, look, nature tech, climate tech, fintech is inherently sexy. You know, there's a $1 trillion cryptocurrency market out there. Sometimes it can serve as a slight detractor from investing into nature-based solutions, into actually looking at slightly more core stuff, and back to your point, into doing deep decarbonization. So I think sometimes going back to basis, in addition to doing the really fun, interesting, and sexy stuff, is also required.
So tech has to be that accelerator. It has to be that piece on top of nature that's going to help us to get there. So I'm just going to hand back to Lucy, but just before I do, so the whole point of this was to try and build more trust. Just a quick show of hands. Who's enjoyed this? Who's found that they're more trusting of where we are? Anyone? Good, most of the audience. There you go, Lucy.
Well, come and talk to those of you who didn't put your hands up afterwards. See, what's the problem? So we're just going to talk to, we've got some nature tech entrepreneurs and nature tech investors and people who are interested in this topic in our front 2 rows. We're going to have a 20-minute discussion, so we finish at 4 o'clock. Anyone in the audience is invited to ask a question or make a comment. So what I ask you to do is I'm going to give you the mic. When I give you the mic, please introduce yourselves, say where you're from, and either ask a question to one of our expert panelists or make a particular comment from your perspective in this area. So who would like to kick off? Great, thank you.
Hi, I'm Guy from Pachama. We use artificial intelligence and machine learning to monitor forests for offset projects. And a lot of the tools that we use are not currently included in offset registries. And in the meantime, while we get those approved, my question to the panel is, what's a good use for those? You know, until we can actually get them used to quantify carbon offsets in a way that's approved.
I'm not sure we've got any carbon market experts here, but maybe we need
Sorry, not a carbon market expert, but so I do believe that at Cambridge we have Centre for Carbon Credits that's actually been doing some really interesting work in remote sensing and trying to use remote sensing to understand whether deforestation avoidance credits work, and allegedly they do. So maybe you can have a chat with them and you can work something out together, because we're talking about collaboration, right?
I would also suggest starting to think about how you can monitor aspects beyond carbon, looking at the co-benefits involved in projects like that. I think although now there aren't a lot of financing mechanisms to pay for those additional social and environmental benefits, hopefully in the future there will be. So I think if you can get the monitoring systems in place now, hopefully it will pay off in the future when you demonstrate the high environmental and social integrity on top of the carbon aspects.
Great, thank you. Okay, I'm going to go to Ed and then Ben in the audience. Ed.
Thanks very much, guys. That's really interesting. I'm Ed Asali at Zulu Forest Sciences. We're involved in restoring landscapes, so we're actually involved in sourcing and designing the projects themselves. And we hear a lot about supply chain monitoring and MRV in the context of nature tech. I just wondered if you've all had much experience of actually nature tech in that initial stage of actually figuring out where and how should we do the work in the first place, and in order to design high quality programs from the ground up.
Don't know if anyone wants to take that, but maybe Pachama would like to answer that question, but Judith, go ahead.
Yeah, we have quite a bit of experience from UNEP WCMC and UNEP as well in identifying areas that can provide these multiple benefits. So I think that's sort of one example where you can start to layer up different benefits on top of one another to identify priority areas for intervention. I think resources are always going to be limited for conservation efforts, for restoration efforts, but if you can restore an area that provides livelihood benefits, benefits for biodiversity, benefits for water protection, agricultural benefits as well, then I think you start to get more pieces of information to inform decision making amidst a scenario of limited resources.
Great. Ben, over to you.
Thank you very much. Hi everyone. Hi panel. Thank you for the great discussion. It's a bit loud. I'm Ben Rattenbury from Silvera, Carbon Credit Ratings Agency. One of the challenges that we see in this space it's very loud in my ear. One of the challenges is to ensure that indigenous people and local communities have access to the technology and the data that the tech produces. So I'd be interested in your thoughts on how that's been done well and some remaining challenges that are still to be overcome. Thank you.
Sorry to monopolize a bit, but no, that's a great question. I think one really interesting example that I think was referred to earlier was forest monitoring in Peru. So that's a case where indigenous peoples have expressed an interest in their RED Plus program, and not just having digital forest monitoring systems and satellites, but actually contributing with on-the-ground data. So they received capacity building on that, and also technology that they needed to help contribute to that. So I think that's one really, really positive example of indigenous peoples being involved in that monitoring. There's lots of examples around about it, but I think that's one particular one.
Okay, I also know Joyce has got something to add, I think, on this topic. Is that right? And then maybe Kat will come to you, and then Oliver and Tom.
Okay, thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Joyce, and I'm from Ghana. I work with the Youth Bridge Foundation. So talking about nature tech, and then one of the most important things that Mark mentioned is the trust in nature tech. So back home in Ghana, the eastern region is one of the forest reserves of the country. And then what we realize is that people are doing logs, and there are lots of farming activities that are destroying the forest. So what we did is we mobilized young people to try and restore these lands. And then technology was used to empower these people to capture the data, store and manage the growth of the plants. So in having these conversations, I think my follow-up question is how to make sure that indigenous people do not feel threatened by technology. Because one of the lessons that came out from our project is that these young people are much more interested in the project because it didn't take anything away from them. They didn't feel threatened. They took the technology as an enabler that is storing data and also making sure that their knowledge on the field are being captured in a way that we can bring to spaces like COP. So I think it's important as we talk about these things, we make sure that technology empowers the people, but it does not take the trust from them. As you mentioned, drones are in. How do you make sure that in teaching them to use the drones, they don't feel threatened in terms of their livelihoods, in terms of other things that they hold dear in the communities?
Can I just add to that? So completely agree with you. I think there's areas though where it's actually easier in certain countries. So in Nigeria, Nadidi, who is a good colleague of ours, she was telling me the other day that when she uses her bank cards in Nigeria, it comes up on her phone. All of her colleagues are all on their phones all the time. They do all their banking on the phone. When she goes to Germany, she can't get any of her details on her phone. She's got to wait for the paper to come through. And actually, her colleagues and others in Nigeria are much more savvy with their phones and how they use that for testing, for data, for all of those sort of things. So you're completely right. We've got to get the balance right. But there's areas where definitely in Nigeria we can learn from that in Europe rather than the other way around. I think we've got to find those bits as well.
Tom, did you want to come after Oliver, or? Okay, so Oliver, you go ahead.
Hi everyone, thank you. I'm Oliver Miltenberger, representing Flint Pro, where we ask a very simple question, which is what is happening with greenhouse gases on the landscape, but we do it with very complicated analyses that often require lots of different data from lots of different sources, management data, remotely sensed data, field data, often from a lot of different partners. And I think all of you mentioned something around this, whether it was trust or integration or data availability or safeguards. And my question is, it is loud actually up here, where is there an opportunity to support open sourcing that data? And where are there potential pitfalls, obstacles, and then opportunities for what happens if we can get better at open sourcing data beyond sort of business level considerations for that?
Thanks. Kat, is that one that you're able to talk about?
Actually, I wonder whether James wants to answer that one.
James?
Just James, sorry, that's very noisy. I'm James, I work with Lucy, I'm one of the other directors at Nature for Climate, and one thing that we're working on at Nature for Climate is creating a working group to bring a lot of the geospatial data people together to look at the interoperability between different data sets. So it's not just about one data set and another, it's about how the data can then talk to each other. And actually we're a bit of a Wild West because different scientists have tagged data slightly differently. So we're looking at the kind of taxonomy systems behind nature-based solutions so that in 2 or 3 years' time the data can talk. So, and this is where we're looking at the open source opportunities of it, because actually some of the open source is important, doesn't stop people creating their own data, but actually we can have a level where the data source, so we've got a working group trying to get together by the global stock take at least, a federated data environment of all the different data sets that we have available. And Louisa at Open Earth is leading on this. So if you want to come and see me afterwards because you have a source of data set, especially if it's geospatial, because we can then link them together through Place. And we can then hopefully run using kind of AI and machine learning to run insights through them which we never even know existed. So first of all is logging those data sets together.
Great, thank you.
Can I just add to that as well? So not in competition with that at all, because we're working with Open Earth and others, but we launched last Thursday the digitalization of sustainability data with the EDM Council as well. So these are the people that sort of regulate the way that data is used. We've launched that to start making sure that we're bringing this in. So that's completely interconnected. So there's a lot going on in this space now.
Great, thanks. I'm just going to hand the mic over to Peter and then afterwards Julia.
Hi everyone, that is loud. Peter Houlan from XPRIZE, thank you for the conversation and congrats on the amazing report. One thing that we've talked a lot about is trust, and one, I think, dimension about having more data, more accessibility, more equitable ways of partnering. One barrier that still remains is effective governance a lot of times, and so we can have a lot more data and a lot of trust at many different levels, but actually being able to implement these data into policy and management can remain difficult. So I'm just curious about any thoughts on breakthroughs for that or overcoming some of those challenges.
Does anyone want to pick that question up? If not, Peter, we might have to talk to you afterwards about that.
Yeah, I think the enabling environment is absolutely key when we think of how data is used, how it's generated, how it's used, how it informs decisions. So I think that's key, and I don't really think there's an answer for it other than recognizing that it is a key factor and just making sure that information is available. And I think transparency is a really key issue with that as well. I think especially when governments change in many countries, oftentimes technical experts who are working on certain subject matters no longer are working for new governments. Data and reports that were generated with the old governments are no longer available as well. So I think making sure that information is open source, accessible, transparent, and is able to last beyond the life cycle of different governments is quite important to be able to take into account those limitations and challenges that you mentioned.
And you at WCMC have been leading a project for us where the amount of data isn't the problem, that there isn't data, as you know. It's the flow of the information. So it is about the connection points that's the real key.
Great, thanks. I know we've got 5 minutes left, so we're going to go to Tom and then Julia in that order, and then Shiloh, if we can be sort of relatively quick. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Tom Buick, and I work with Nature for Climate. A couple of people have mentioned the Peru study. That's I designed and implemented that. It was published last year. And one thing that how we thought of the idea is that when you get technology directly to the communities, the implementers, right? The people that actually save forest, plant the trees, manage the land, the governance. It statistically, at least in the study, and I would theorize further on, conserve more forest than those that did not have the technology tools. And I would argue that and actually the study found it actually complemented governance, because when communities can see their land from a spatial perspective, and having the data and the cameras and the smartphones, that allows the entire community to see what is going on with any kind of restoration or conservation project, and actually facilitate a more dialogue and discussion and problem solving and conflict resolution than communities that didn't. And so I think, and then the big question is, how do we get these tools to people like Joyce, and from Nigeria Conservation Foundation is here too, people that are actually on the ground implementing, and then that has to be financed as well.
Thank you very much. I'm Giulia Carbone from the Natural Climate Solution Alliance. I love your idea, Tom. This idea of giving a dashboard to the community to check their own. So making sure that the technology is not just used as a punishment. It's like, we are checking on you. I think that's a really important entry point. From the buyer perspective, like companies that will purchase credits, I think what is important is also helping them. They're not going to be the one using the technology, but helping them navigate and be able to understand what technologies has been used in verifying the results that are being sold is also important. So we'll definitely have to make a link, Lucy, for the NCS procurement guide that we have out, but also to give them a sense, right? Because they could be flooded saying, oh, we use 10 technologies, and maybe they're all kind of completely irrelevant. So can we create a map of relevant things to measure what? So for NCS carbon credit, so that the user, the demand can say, oh, okay, you're using the right technology because that's what we are looking for. So something that it's easy for actually a company that is just doing last minute procurement.
I'm just going to hand to Shyla for the last question, and then we'll have to wrap up.
Thank you, Lucy. I'm Shyla Raghav with CO2 by Time. We're a climate action platform for businesses. My question is, well, first, I think it's really impressive to see how much this space has grown, and congratulations to all of you for all of your work in really accelerating the momentum in nature tech. But I think one thing we have to be conscious of is we don't want to reinforce the siloization of nature across other agendas. So I'm wondering where you're seeing opportunities to more intentionally integrate and connect nature tech with climate tech, with climate risk tech, agri-tech. What are those kind of connection points that you think we can all be conscious of making as we continue expanding the space?
I'll kick off with it. I'm sure there will be loads of other answers to this. When we think about climate and carbon credits, can we think about biodiversity credits as well? So sort of building a single one that actually looks at biodiversity at the same time as it looks at carbon, because otherwise we're optimizing for the wrong thing.
And we're really interested at the moment in using the sort of metrics that we can develop to make those links between resilient ecosystems that are going to deliver long-term both climate benefits but other benefits as well, and starting to be able to look at metrics of the health and resilience of the ecosystem, and sort of moving biodiversity beyond just sort of lists of threatened species and things, but actually looking at what are the components of biodiversity that are driving the functioning and resilience of ecosystems. And I think that's such an important link to make, so we can start joining up the finance, getting real flows into nature-based solutions from the climate finance.
Yeah, as I mentioned before, the Spaces Coalition that we're working on has this objective to work using spatial intelligence for nature and climate objectives. For example, supporting countries to put maps in their NDCs. There's many times that there's very ambitious NDC targets, but no quantification of them, let alone any spatial information to support them. So that's definitely the type of planning across objectives that we're trying to do as well.
Well, I think the obvious silos that people talk about are bringing the sort of climate and nature space together, but I think we should, to our earlier discussion, think about the people agenda too, and how we're mapping communities and community data into that picture too, so we can see who has potential to benefit. And if I can throw in one last sort of finishing thought, it's really interesting that what we've talked about the huge economic potential for this sector. I think we should be asking also how much of that tech development is happening in the global south, because you could imagine where we get to in a space where a lot of these biodiverse, super interesting spaces that need this nature tech are all in the global south, and yet all the tech is developed, owned, and value extracted from the global north.
It's a very good point, Thomas. So, and on that note, we've been discussing maybe in 6 months' time, it would be great to think about having like an entire nature tech day somewhere at a kind of climate week. You know, San Francisco, apparently I heard, is thinking about doing a climate week, but actually why not do something focused much more on the global south, and we should maybe have that discussion afterwards. But I just want to say thank you so much for coming along. A huge thank you to our panelists who did an amazing job talking about nature tech. If you had trouble hearing it, this has been live streamed, so we have a video which hopefully you'll be able to hear. And a big thank you to our partners who wrote the report, Capital for Climate. It's worth having a look at their website, because they don't just have the report on nature tech, but they have an entire nature-based solutions investment platform, which is worth looking at, and looking at the different business models for investing in nature-based solutions. So huge thank you for coming today. We'll be hanging out here for a little while if you want to chat, so come on up and talk to our panelists. Thank you.